Great.
exercise
I'll
their
keep
right
an
to
eye.
vote.
We'll try to keep a tally.
Let us know who the winner is on International Women's Day.
Yes, that's right. I forgot to wish you a happy International Women's Day. That's right.
Thank you.
That's right.
I'll have to remember to wish everybody in the meeting a happy International Women's Day. Hope I don't forget.
That's perfect. Yes, I forgot. My sister came to visit the museum a couple of weeks ago, and she brought two friends of hers from out of town. So I gave them a little tour of the Civil War and women's suffrage exhibits. So she sent my sister a text this morning that my sister forwarded to me that said, "Happy International Women's Day. Tell your brother thank you for the tour of the exhibit." So,
oh, that's sweet.
Yeah.
My dad wants to come by on Friday. I froze a bit there. I'm lagging. Is that better?
Yeah, you seem good.
Weird. I didn't change anything, but as I was watching my own video, my mouth was moving at like a different rate than what I was talking. But yeah, my dad wants to come by
up here
Friday.
on the top floor, right next to the theater entrance. So, and if you're hearing this, your kids can drop them off on their way out. Maybe we can wheel it back down after.
You can't hear mine, right?
Your what?
My walkie.
No.
Okay.
You can probably hear mine because I just held it up
Oh,
close
I
to my
can.
microphone. I was trying to listen. I'm just turning it down.
Yeah. I can't hear mine, so I figured you couldn't hear it, but there it
No.
goes again. Okay.
You seem okay.
Okay,
The
let me
hotspot's
know.
on and everything?
Yeah, and I'm on it. So let me know if
Okay.
that keeps doing. Oh, now it's switched to NCC staff.
Oh, it just
So maybe
happened.
that's
It just happened again, but your sound didn't break up, but your video slowed down for a second.
okay. Because it's saying that I'm connected to the Wi-Fi, but I'm not connected. Okay. Now it says I am connected to the AT&T Wi-Fi. So that should be good. I don't know why it keeps trying to switch me back to NCC staff. Okay. Okay. Cool. All right, there we go. Now it's showing that we are all set. It was like saying that it was connected to the hotspot, but then it was also saying that it was connected to NCC staff.
To both? Oh.
So I think it kept trying to like kick itself off.
Nope. It's working great now.
Yeah, it was just weird because I wouldn't think it would even change that much because I'm not moving that much.
Nope.
But I guess there it goes. Oh my gosh. I don't know what happened. It definitely says I'm connected. I don't know what to do. You'll just have to let me know if anything happens.
Yeah, but the sounds hasn't been stopping. You've been fine.
Okay.
Are you ready for us to start the webinar here?
Can you give me like 2 seconds?
Sure. Well, I might start the webinar and then just go ahead and we'll still wait 2 more minutes because it's not quite time, but this way we can let folks in. All right. Just gonna start that up for us here. Hello to everybody that's joining us right now. So my name is Mike. I'm one of the managers here at the National Constitution Center. As you can see, I am downstairs in the offices, but Angela here, one of our educators, is upstairs in the exhibit, and she's going to be doing the presentation for us. So we're going to give it just another minute or two just to get some folks here to allow everybody to get in before we start. Also, just a reminder, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, you can post those into the chat. Angela and I can see those. And you can also use the Q&A function, which is located at the bottom of your screen under the Zoom. All right. Well, I think we are just about at time. So I know there might be some folks that are still going to be coming in. We also are recording this. So it'll be available on our YouTube channel or on our website afterwards. So if anybody misses the beginning. So I am actually going to turn it over to Angela, who is in our 19th Amendment exhibit for our presentation of Women Leading the Way. So Angela, go ahead.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome virtually to the National Constitution Center. As Mike said, my name is Angela. I'm one of the educators here at the museum, and I'm going to take you through this later portion of the movement for women's suffrage in honor, of course, of International Women's Day today. So we're going to be starting out with, what do you think of when you think of women's suffrage? Are there any names that come to mind? Some people? You can think of any famous figures from that movement. Feel free to drop them in the chat there. A lot of times I see we're getting through some people here that we are very familiar with, some women maybe that are featured behind me, right? We're thinking of some women like right up here, Harriet Tubman that we can see. Also about perhaps Sojourner Truth, who's right here. We can see her here. Mary Ann Shadd Cary, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Susan B. Anthony, of course, are all going to be really notable figures from this part of the movement. We'll get to Rosa Parks a little bit later on. She's going to come along in our movement a little bit later. But this early movement for women's suffrage is going to really focus on women going out and going to the polls and casting their ballots despite opposition. So these women featured here, as well as some notable men as well, such as Frederick Douglass, are going to be laying the foundation for this movement. However, even though Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Mary Ann Shadd Cary, and Sojourner Truth are going to be laying the foundation for this movement and setting it all up, unfortunately, they will not live to see the ratification of the 19th Amendment. They would have to pass it off to a new generation of women, some of them even their daughters, like we have pictured here with Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She has her daughter right here in her arms. And these women are going to be the ones that are going to take over this 19th Amendment, this push for women's suffrage, and are going to officially get it added to the Constitution using a bit of different tactics from our previous women. Some of these early women, such as Susan B. Anthony, like I said, are going to go to the polls despite opposition. Susan B. Anthony would actually be arrested in 1872 for casting her ballot for Ulysses S. Grant in a presidential election. She's going to be fined $100, but she will never pay it. Mary Ann Shadd Cary here is going to take 63 women from Washington, D.C. to the polls to demand their right to vote, but unfortunately, they would be denied. Sojourner Truth would do the same thing in Battle Creek, Michigan. And Victoria Woodhull would actually be the first woman to run for president through the Equal Rights Party. But like I said, these women are going to have to pass off the work to a new, younger generation of women who are going to be making use of some different tactics than our early women had used. While our early women are going to be going to the polls and speaking out, writing documents like the Declaration of Sentiments, which is going to list all of the grievances against men and demanding the right to vote. As we can see here, this next generation of women is going to make use of media. They're going to be putting out posters and flyers advocating for women's suffrage. Even as we can see here in this lower case here, we have some buttons and teacups and all these different things that women would use to get their message out in favor of women's right to vote. And they're going to take on some pretty confrontational tactics as well as they start making their way through history and trying to call attention to their cause. One of the biggest methods that women are going to use is going to be to march and to parade and to demand this right to vote in Washington, D.C., just in front of the president's house. Here we have women from the 1913 women's suffrage procession who are going to march through the streets of Washington, D.C., and they're going to demand this right to vote. Now, what's important to know about this suffrage procession is that it takes place on March 3rd of 1913. Now, before the 1930s and the 20th Amendment to the Constitution, March 4th used to be Inauguration Day. Now it's January 20th. But back then, it was on March 4th. And so these women strategically planned their march in Washington, D.C. to happen the day before the presidential inauguration. It would be President-elect Woodrow Wilson who's going to be coming into office. And this chaos here that these women are creating, that they're asking them for this right to vote, is going to be drawing attention to this women's suffrage issue and is going to mark it as one of the biggest issues of Wilson's administration. When these women, hundreds of thousands of them, are going to gather in the streets of Washington, D.C., people aren't going to be paying attention to President-elect Woodrow Wilson. On the day that he arrives in Washington, D.C. by train, nobody even shows up to welcome him, just a few people, because everybody's going to be here at this suffrage procession. There's going to be news coverage the day of the inauguration that's still going to be talking about this women's suffrage procession, and Woodrow Wilson's inauguration is only going to be second-page news. So this procession is really going to work. They're going to be taking to the streets and demanding this right to vote. This procession is going to be chiefly organized by suffragists such as Alice Paul, who's actually from New Jersey, and other women who are going to contribute to the movement, such as Helen Keller, who was an advocate for women's rights, minority rights, as well as the rights of disabled people. And she's going to be a co-founder of the ACLU. Another fantastic woman who is going to be part of this procession, despite opposition, is going to be Ida B. Wells. Now, it's important to understand about America at this time is that in the early 1900s, we were still in the period of Jim Crow segregation. And so people were not allowed to intermingle in the streets or to participate in the same spaces. And so Ida B. Wells, who is a Black woman from Illinois, is going to ask to be a part of this procession. And she's actually going to ask if her whole suffrage club can contribute as well. She's going to be one of the founders of the Alpha Suffrage Club in 1913. And she's going to write to Alice Paul, and she's going to say, "Hi, Alice Paul, we are very interested in participating in your parade. Please tell us that we can march in this parade as well." And of course, because this is the period of segregation, Alice Paul is going to say, "Well, I suppose you can march with the group, but you will have to march at the back if you want to march at all." And Ida B. Wells here, she is going to hear that instruction from Alice Paul, and she's going to start out the procession at the back as she was told to. But then partway through, she's going to break ranks and she's going to march to the front of the procession to march with her Illinois delegation. She's going to be a trendsetter in history for women's rights, but also she's going to be a prominent advocate against lynching. And so she's going to step up as one of the bravest women involved in this movement. We can see here on the wall behind me, we have hundreds of women that are participating in this procession. Here we can see all of the women marching in the street. Now, they were not without opposition, though. There are going to be a number of men who are going to line up along the street following the suffrage procession, and they're going to be having a counter protest. And unfortunately, hundreds of women are going to be injured, and the police are going to do very little, if anything, to help out these women. But fear not, because like I said, this procession absolutely works to get their message across. These women are demanding that President Woodrow Wilson and Congress pay attention to them and put their agenda, this women's suffrage, women's right to vote, at the front of all of the actions that are going to be coming out of this administration. As we move forward in time from 1913, we're getting here to 1917, where another group of women are going to continue to protest in Washington, D.C. You can see here behind me that we have an image here of Alice Paul, who I said was one of the chief organizers of that suffrage procession. We have Mary Church Terrell here, who was going to be one of the founders of the National Association for Colored Women. We have Mabel Pingwa Lee, who is going to be a huge advocate for women's suffrage in New York. She's actually going to run her own suffrage procession in the state of New York in 1917. And New York is going to be the first state on the East Coast to give women full suffrage, all thanks to the work of Dr. Mabel Pingwa Lee here. Now, unfortunately, Dr. Mabel Pingwa Lee, even after New York has accepted the full women's suffrage, she still won't be able to vote. Mabel Pingwa Lee was from China originally, and she was an immigrant. And so at this time, unfortunately, there was the Chinese Exclusion Act and other discriminatory practices against immigrants. And so she could not attain citizenship and was not able to vote. However, this movement in this time period is going to be making great strides. We also have here women, like I said, that are going to be going right to Woodrow Wilson's White House door. Women that are going to look like my friend here, that are going to be asking, Mr. President, what will you do for women's suffrage? They're actually going to stand right out in front of the White House on the sidewalk, and they are going to make these demands. Now, what's important to understand about these women is that they're going to be standing silently. And like I said, they will be on the sidewalk. So they're going to show up every day, rain or shine, to make sure that Woodrow Wilson knows that they are still there and they still want the right to vote. And after a while, Woodrow Wilson gets a little sick of seeing them on his front lawn. And so these women would be arrested and they would be taken to prison. They're going to be arrested for charges such as obstructing traffic. Now, if you were paying attention, I said that they were on the sidewalk. How could you possibly be obstructing traffic from the sidewalk? It was kind of a bogus charge. It didn't really make much sense, but it was all to make sure that these women could no longer be advocating for their cause. However, they are not going to stop there. These women are going to be sent to prison, and they are going to continue to advocate for their cause. These silent sentinels here are going to continue the work from within the jailhouse. There, they are going to refuse to eat. They are going to refuse to work, and they're going to be actively continuing the protest for women's rights. Now, this is going to look really bad for Woodrow Wilson's presidency here. People are going to be upset that the press is covering these women who are in prison just for speaking out for their rights, for advocating to be included in this democracy. And so eventually, thanks to the US admission into World War I, the women's suffrage movement is finally going to get some traction in Congress, because women are going to make this amazing argument here, which we can kind of see up on some of these posters behind me. Women are going to be arguing that they are stepping up. They are filling the jobs that men have left behind, and they are helping their country. They are contributing. Here, some women are going to refer to President Wilson as Kaiser Wilson, calling him like the Kaiser of Germany. And what they're drawing attention to here is the idea that we're sending troops overseas to try and fight for democracy abroad, to help on the international front to secure rights for people around the world. But half of the population here at home still wasn't fully included in this idea of we the people. And this argument is going to work. The suffrage amendment, which is going to be the 19th Amendment to the US Constitution, is going to pass through Congress in 1919. Now, if we're familiar with how the amendment process works, we know that the battle wasn't yet over for this 19th Amendment to be added to the Constitution, because the states still needed to ratify. At this time, with the number of states that we had in the Union, there was going to be 36 states that would need to ratify this 19th Amendment to the Constitution. Now, as we get into August of 1920, we have 35 states that have already ratified the amendment, and a number of states that have said no to this 19th Amendment. And it all comes down to the state of Tennessee. Tennessee is going to be the deciding vote in favor of women's suffrage. And so these people are going to gather, these men who are going to cast their ballots in the Tennessee state legislature, and they're going to be gathering in order to cast their votes on whether or not this 19th Amendment should be included in the Constitution. As they're gathering in the State House, some men are going to be joining here in the State House, and they're going to be using a certain symbol to indicate whether or not they plan to vote for suffrage. Men who are going to show up wearing red roses in their lapel are going to have the intention of voting against women's suffrage. And men who are going to show up wearing yellow roses are indicating their support for the women's suffrage amendment. Now, when the ballots are being cast in the legislature, it is a even tie. There's been 49 ballots cast for suffrage, 49 cast against. The fate of women's suffrage in this country is going to be hanging in the balance, and there is one man who will cast that deciding vote. And that one man is going to be a 24-year-old from the state of Tennessee, and his name is Harry Byrne. Now, Harry Byrne had entered the state legislature that morning wearing a red rose, indicating that he had intended to vote against suffrage. Women in the crowd are crying. They're fearing that this is the end of women's right to vote in the United States. However, Harry Byrne, just the night before, had received a letter from somebody very important to him, which would change his mind in favor of suffrage. This letter is going to be from his mother, Feb Byrne. Feb Byrne is going to write to her son, and she is going to say, be a good boy. Help Mrs. Cat and her rat suffragists here to win this right to vote. Be a good boy and vote in favor of suffrage. And you know what? His mom had a little bit of extra insight there, and he listened to what his mother had to say, followed her wisdom, and he changed his vote to vote in favor of women's suffrage. And so the 19th Amendment would be officially added to the U.S. Constitution. And this would end sex-based discrimination in voting practices. However, although this is a great victory, we know that progress is not linear, and that this was not going to be the solution for all women in this country. Women such as Frankie Pierce, who was present at the vote here in Tennessee, a Tennessee woman herself, is going to hope that Black women in this country are going to get a fair deal as well when it comes to the time of Black women being included in this democracy as well. Like I said, this was still the time of Jim Crow era segregation. And so the battle had to continue to be fought. There's going to be another generation who we've talked about a little bit already, who are going to be stepping to the forefront and continuing the fight for equality in this country. Women such as Rosa Parks, who would refuse to give up her seat on a bus. Coretta Scott King, who's going to be at the front of the movement with her husband, Martin Luther King Jr. And then, of course, women down here, like we can see here, Fannie Lou Hamer, who's going to say that she is sick and tired of being sick and tired. Women like Barbara Jordan, who are going to wonder whether at the founding of this country, if the founders had considered her at all in this writing of the idea of we the people. And thanks to this next generation of fighters, of strong women who are going to stand up for their rights, we would see more changes to our nation's government. We're going to see the 1964 Civil Rights Act, as well as the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which are going to attempt to rid us of discriminatory practices in voting. Things like poll taxes, where you had to pay money in order to cast your ballot, or literacy tests, where you had to pass a test before you could cast your vote. All of these things are going to be outlawed and banned by these changes to our government, these new laws, this 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act. So although this movement is going to take a lot of work and a lot of women, it's going to span multiple generations, we know that these incredible women have laid the foundation for us here today. We are getting closer and closer every day to those ideals that the founders wrote down in the Declaration of Independence, the idea that all men are created equal. We're getting steps closer every day, and these women have shown us a path to continue to fight for equality in this country, to continue to ask that all people be created equal in this country and be included in that vision of we the people. So that's a little bit of a sneak peek into our 19th Amendment exhibit, focusing on the confrontational tactics that women are going to use to support this suffrage movement. Now, in honor of International Women's Day, I would like you all to cast your own vote. Take up the example of these women and cast your vote for your favorite woman that we have discussed here today. Women such as Alice Paul and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Mabel Ping Lee, Ida B. Wells. Drop her name in the chat. Whoever was your favorite person to learn about here today, who has inspired you the most? Perhaps it's Barbara Jordan. I would love to hear who most inspired you today. I see a couple of answers coming in the chat. I'm so excited that you are all inspired by these incredible women. I hope that they have encouraged you to go out and see what you can do, how you can use your voice to encourage this concept of all people are created equal, to include more people in that idea of we the people. All right, I see some coming in here. We've got Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks is leading the pack here in votes. Barbara Jordan, wonderful. Well, feel free to continue dropping your answers in the chat. I just want to thank you all again for joining us here on International Women's Day to explore this 19th Amendment, How Women Won the Vote exhibit that we have here at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia. And if you have a chance during Women's History Month or any other time of the year, we hope that you will join us here in person and get a chance to see firsthand all of these incredible artifacts that we have on display here. All right, wonderful. I see more Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman. I think that those are probably our winners for the day based on what I'm seeing coming in the chat, which is fantastic. Again, I hope that you have all had a fantastic time exploring this exhibit and that maybe I've piqued your interest in learning a little bit more about other women in American history who have been so fundamental in changing our government and the way that our Constitution works, being reframers of this Constitution. All right, let's see. Do we have any questions coming through here as well? I can take some questions at this time. If anybody has any, feel free to either drop them into the Q&A or into our chat function. All right, I see a question here comparing our two women's suffrage processions, our one from DC in 1913, as well as the one in New York in 1917. They are both very closely related. They're going to be playing off of one another. A number of the same women are going to participate in both marches. And the reaction is going to be pretty much the same from both of them. Like I said, there are going to be a number of women who are going to join these processions in support of the women's suffrage movement. And there's going to be a number of counter protesters who are going to come out and oppose this fight for women's suffrage. Right. Let me see here. We have a question. Why did the men who were voting for the amendment wear a rose as a symbol of their vote? Good question. So this is going to be an easy visual way for people to see how they intended to vote on the question of the 19th Amendment. And so they picked these colors because yellow is actually going to be one of the colors that is associated with women's suffrage. The colors that we most commonly associate with the women's suffrage movement here in the US are going to be white, gold, and purple. And so that's why yellow is chosen as the color in support of women's suffrage. On the opposite side of things, red is a pretty different color from yellow. And so the people who are opposing suffrage are going to choose the red rose in Tennessee to wear to indicate that they plan to vote against suffrage. All right, our museum is located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, just across the street from Independence Hall. Like I said, where these founders gathered here to write those promises in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal and to start off the Constitution with "we the people." And so here we are going to be fulfilling the rest of that promise. It's like Martin Luther King Jr. said that the Constitution had written a promissory note. And so these women are going to be part of the movement to encourage more people to be included in those visions that the founders had written just a few steps from where we are today. All right, I don't see any more questions in the chat at the moment. All right, so I hope you all have enjoyed this presentation here, this little bit of a deep dive that we got to do into the later portion of the women's suffrage movement. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Happy International Women's Day.